Welcome back to Tech-Tulia.
Hey!
Do it like a morning. Hey, it's morning. Good weather out there.
We should do our radio host impressions or something.
I'm NPR.
Okay. I don't listen to much radio these days.
Donald Trump today announced new sanctions against Mexico, imperiling our avocado supply. You hear this? I don't know. It'll probably be all resolved by the time anybody listens to this. But Donald Trump's going to close the border.
Yeah. And what does that mean, though?
Well, I don't know. Like they're gonna they stop the trucks.
Is there a door?
There's a wall now.
There's a wall.
Well, there's always been a wall. But no, they're gonna stop all the trucks from coming through, and then
really.
Yeah, but the problem is, among the millions of problems that would cause, is that rich people would not be able to get avocados.
That's a shame.
So. That's, of course, the news story, at least today, is that Donald Trump's going to take away avocados, and people are losing their minds.
That's not okay?
But we're not going to talk about that.
Okay.
Today we're going to talk about disruption. And that's a very popular... If you've listened to anything, any tech media, you've heard the word disruption.
Yeah.
But I think today, on this episode... we're going to break it down, and most of the time that people use disruption, they use it completely wrong.
How so?
Well, we'll get into that.
All right.
But that's a great question. And then, as I've said in the previous two episodes, Guadalajara gets views. Guadalajara listens. It drives the ratings, and that's absolutely the most important thing, because we got to get those sponsor dollars for this episode, for this show. And that's not going to happen without a big viewer base.
Tapatio, if you're listening.
Yeah, so we're just going all in on Tapatios. You got to tune in. I know we're doing it in English. I think we got to switch to Spanish soon.
One of these days.
Mi español es mejorando. Está mejorando. Sí, it's
getting there.
I got to nail it, though.
We'll figure it out.
So we're going to talk about Jalisco, our home state, where we're currently recording. And but we're going to talk about disruption, and we're going to try to pull off a little mix of the two. So if you like Mexico or you like tech, listen to Tech-Tulia.
Yeah, there you go.
But we're recording in English, so maybe one more leg of that stool. we get the real breakthroughs and get those taco dollars from Tacos One rolling in. So I've been reading this book that I meant to read for years called Innovator's Dilemma. And a dilemma is when you have kind of two problems that can't really be worked out. You have two choices, and both of them are pretty bad, and it ends up with you being in a pretty tough spot. And so this book, just to give you a quick outline, is about companies that are facing these kind of new threats from emerging technology, and they want to move their company forward, but they're in a situation where they can't.
Okay.
Because of the way that their company works, the way they make decisions. And it leads to companies completely going out of business when a new disruptive technology comes in. And so the examples that they use in the book is that there would be these people who would make disk drives. Okay. And they would make these very big disk drives. And the good thing about having a really big disk drive back in the in the 70s is you could put a lot of data on it for cheap.
Right.
And so they would get better and better and better at putting data really cheaply on this disk drive. And if you're on the video, it's this big. It's 8 inches, 14 inches for like a platter with a disk spinning, and it writes the data and all that stuff. And so, in this classic example, the disk gets better and better and better, and you can have 300 megabytes. This is olden times on this 14-inch platter, and then so somebody comes along with a smaller, say a 5 1/4 inch platter. So it's much smaller. It holds much less data, and therefore your cost because it holds so little data, your cost per megabyte, which is what people want, they're buying disk drives to store data, their cost per megabyte's way higher. So it's a worse product. Okay. But, and this is exactly what happens in a disruptive product. You have a really good existing product, and then somebody comes in with a cheaper, crappier, or in this case even more expensive but smaller, crappier, less functional, and the company who makes the big giant drives looks at that tiny drive and says, I can't do anything for any of our customers. Right. But what happens is, over time, new markets emerge, niche markets that are able to use the smaller drives, say laptops.
Okay.
And you can't put a 14-inch, 75-pound disk drive in a laptop, so it needs a much smaller drive. And so as those types of new emerging markets come in, they start to have to use the smaller, less functional drives. But then over time, they get better and better. And suddenly, these tiny drives are good enough for every application. And you don't ever see a 14-inch hard drive anymore.
Right.
Because they've all been put out of business because these small drives got better and better over time and then put the old ones out of business.
Interesting.
So that's the example in the book. I wouldn't want to try to think of a better example than Clayton Christensen.
So what I'm thinking about is, could it be that, I mean, I'm not trying to be like brand oriented or anything, but could it be like when the iPhone came out and then Android and like all of the cheap Android phones were actually kind of bad, right? Mm-hmm. Compared to the gold standard, which was the iPhone. But these days, a like 3,000 peso Android phone is competing in capability sometimes with one of the probably older iPhones or whatnot, but the product was a little bit bad.
Well, yeah, it very well could be the case that Android eventually, I mean, they have taken most of the market share,
right?
But I would use a different example in the phone space because Apple clearly is the most valuable company in the world or close to it any given day, and their most profitable company, except for Aramco, which is the new Saudi oil IPO.
Where did that come from? Yeah,
they want to try to sell all their oil and like IPO it before people stop using oil.
Yeah, that's
sorry. We're digressing into oil. Anyway, Apple's a very successful company, so it'd probably be bad to say like, but maybe in the future Apple won't be successful. But a good example is Nokia.
Okay.
I remember Nokia or Motorola, they made these flip phones.
Yeah.
And they said, we're way better at making phones. We make the phones that people actually want. And I remember when the iPhone first came out in, 2007?
Yeah.
And somebody brought it out to, some friend got it probably a while after it had been out, and it just didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It took forever to download a web page. It's like, look, if I wanted to look at that web page, I would go on my laptop.
Yeah.
And I would look up the web page using Wi-Fi. I wouldn't use, 1G or whatever it was at the time, and try to wait 7 or 8 minutes for a page to load. And then there was no mobile apps at the time, and so it was just pointless. And so Nokia and BlackBerry were like, why is anyone going to use this stupid iPhone? Right. But then some people used it because it was cool or it had different application. It didn't have buttons. It had this full screen. You could do different stuff with it. But it was a shitty phone compared to these things. But over time, it got good enough that there's no BlackBerries anymore. There's no Nokias anymore. There's no Motorola's anymore, really.
So, and what is what is kind of the advice there? I mean, what is the sweet spot? I mean, what should people do when they're trying to create something innovative and debunk the existing king of the hill type of product, service, whatever?
Well, not every king of the hill can be debunked. Okay. I don't know that someone can come in and do better search than Google.
But you know what's interesting? I was reading an article by Paul Graham. He said, I would fund anybody that would compete against PayPal, and I believe Stripe is that company. I would fund anybody that would do the next Craigslist, and I would fund the next company that does search. I mean, in that case, obviously Google is out of the question, but it's interesting. I mean, you wouldn't think as an entrepreneur or somebody building something to go against a very well-established business. That's exactly what Google did.
I mean, when Google first came out, everyone said, well, Yahoo has already won the search wars. Right. And Yahoo had a way of, it used to be Jerry's site or something like that, right? Jerry Yang. And what they did is indexing. Right. And so what they would do is take every website and kind of put it into a category. And then there were some search functions, but you could basically click down. And I remember Yahoo back then was like, you could click like sports. Yeah. And ESPN.com was like...
Because you could categorize the internet manually.
And that's what they do. They would categorize manually. And then Google, because they were computer science students, used the PageRank. Yeah. I believe that was the first one they used.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And that's actually named after Larry Page. It's not named for the web page.
Really?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a use case of nominative determinism.
What is that?
That's when your name determines what you do. If your name is Larry Page, you're going to invent a way to search websites or web pages.
That sounds very odd.
It was fate. You know the Price Club? You ever heard of the Price Club?
Yeah.
In the United States?
Yeah.
Guy's name was Saul Price.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That he had
Bad luck. My last name is Gonzalez. What do I do with that?
Look, not everybody has it. Gonzalez means podcaster in Spanish.
There you go.
That's actually where it comes from. No, well, geez, we got distracted. So Google had a automated service that probably initially wasn't as performant, and they sold it to other companies as a kind of an internal search capability that didn't require manual indexing. But then they, just to show off their technology, they had Google.com, and they said, hey, we'll try it out instead of on an internal website. We'll just try it on the whole web. And eventually it became more popular than Yahoo, and then Yahoo kind of went off to the wayside. And interesting enough, another innovation, and Bismarck always says that this is the big thing that he was at Google in like 2002, said the big thing that allowed Google to beat everybody was also that they use cheaper, crappier commodity hardware that they could just kind of throw away when it broke, rather than going and spending big on the big enterprise routers. I don't know what kind of computer stuff they use, but the fact that they use crappy computers and they had the ability to kind of quickly swap things out, and when things broke, correct for it, rather than buying that stuff, that kept their prices low. And that was another kind of a disruptive thing. But the trick is, and going back, I said that we're going to debunk a lot of that's what people want. They want debunkings.
Okay.
Matt destroys with logic. Anyway, the idea of disruption, it's not any technology that comes along that's good.
Okay.
It's a technology that comes along that's worse. That's the key. Because the trick that the problem that companies get into is most companies are actually well managed. And if a new technology comes along, like AI for Google, right? AI isn't going to disrupt search.
Right.
It's actually it's a sustaining innovation for Google's existing business. Yeah. And the better AI gets, the better Google search get. And so there's no real problem for Google. Google's not going to go out of business like Nokia did. The problem is if there was some really pointless way of searching that started out really, really bad, and then people started using it for whatever reason, and then it suddenly became much better. And at no point does Google have the opportunity to adapt that technology, because when it's bad, Google can't use it because people expect, you don't want to go on search and get bad results.
Right.
So they can't use it then. But then by the time it gets just as good as their AI-driven search that they have now, well, now there's no reason for Google to exist, and they go out of business.
It's still a hard thing for me to understand how a worse product will beat a better product just for the only reason that you need to wait for the right timing for that product to become relevant. Is that it?
A lot of times it's not predictable. Okay. And so there isn't necessarily always, like I said, you can't always just pick a market and say, how do I disrupt it? Well, there's a lot of crappy technologies that are never going to somehow become good.
Right.
And a lot of times it's not clear how a crappy technology will become a market beater, because it requires finding a very particular niche market to support it for those years or months when it's kind of growing. And then there's no guarantee that where you start from is going to lead to something much better. Okay. But in a lot of cases, it is kind of predictable, or there are at least signs. And so I think to get those views and to get that traffic, we're going to talk about Guadalajara, but this will also allow us to ground, I think, some more tangible characteristics of an inferior product. And I'm going to say this as a passionate supporter of our city, that Guadalajara is not as good as San Francisco for building certain types of companies.
Right.
In particular, it's worse. Google could not exist. Google has 70,000 people.
Yeah.
How many in their headquarters? I'm just making up a number, but it's like a lot. And they got the CEO, the board members, all the executives. They have people who invented the web who are working for them and stuff. I don't know exactly who, but they got all of these hyper specialized people that there's only one of in the entire world. They all live near Mountain View.
Yeah.
And you can't run Google without all of them.
Yeah.
And so if you tried to take Google and just move it to Guadalajara, it would be a giant disaster.
Yeah.
So you say to yourself, well, San Francisco is the best place in the world to start a company, because that's where companies have traditionally started. The companies started there are Google. Do you want to be the next Google? you got to go and you got to move to San Francisco.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody thinks. And that makes a lot of sense because it's a superior product. And if I tried to convince somebody, hey, start the next Google down in Guadalajara, people are going to say,
yeah.
no.
Why? Yeah.
There's going to be a whole bunch of problems. And I'd like to like actually go through those problems and look at it. And so we can kind of see, because I believe, and this is the big reveal, that Guadalajara is a disruptive product.
How?
It's worse. And there are things that could allow it to become competitive for certain markets, or even, and this is like the wild dream, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could become actually a superior market for even companies like Google. That there could be companies as big, diverse, and influential as Google in a city like Guadalajara, precisely because if Guadalajara allows small companies to grow here, while Guadalajara is an inferior market to start a Google,
right?
Well, those companies are going to grow, but then the city's going to respond, and the city's going to grow as well. And so let's talk about the specifics of how that might happen. Like, so first of all, 10 years ago, I mean, you lived here, but I've been coming down probably like 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And in Guadalajara, even 7 or 8 years ago, the power would go out more often.
Yes, it did. The internet was super slow.
The internet sucked.
Yep.
And there simply weren't a lot of people with experience. There's certainly a lot of Mexicans with experience in high-tech companies, but most of them had left. And even you were leaving.
Yeah.
Right? You had moved up to Silicon Valley or New York, wherever you were. And so all of the kind of components that would be necessary to start Wiseline, or a company like Wiseline, which is clearly successful now, to the extent that we have hundreds of employees, and you see a lot of companies like that coming to Guadalajara, that just wasn't possible.
Right.
So it started out, it was too bad to support any company.
Right.
Or maybe it just companies hadn't been supported because of it. But then it improved, the internet got better, and then people started moving here, they're moving back, you moved back, you started the Uyala office and so on. And I would say now that for a lot of companies that are here, Guadalajara is a good choice.
Interesting.
It's not the right choice for
the
Google.
Googles of the world. Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg isn't going to try to move his entire executive team down here.
Right.
That probably would be a bad idea right now.
And that is fine, right?
And it's fine.
Yeah.
But let's look at the main thing. So let's imagine that there's two different markets. There's just two. And this is actually a pretty good approximation, I believe. There is the gigantic, world-beating tech company. There's a lot of reasons that should be in San Francisco.
Right.
Or at least in San Francisco or New York, or something like that. Because you need somebody who's your head of marketing who understands how to run a marketing department that spends $4 billion a year.
Right.
There's only a few people who know that. You need to have board members who understand how to get your IPO or to, keep your stock market valuation and things like that. There's all these kind of new technologies that are popping up that you need to have 100,000 people working in your data centers, or there's just a lot of things and Guadalajara currently does not have those heads of marketing, those CEOs, corporate board members, or the large number of VCs.
Okay.
But let's imagine we take right now, we know that there are small companies that are building enterprise applications, consumer applications, and they're starting to be fairly successful. And not only that, but you have employees who are working in these companies for years. Well, in 2012, there was nobody who had the type of experience that you have. A dozen managers working for you who now have that and live in Guadalajara. And in 5 more years, you're going to have people who've been VPs and directors or even C-level at this, at just this company, not to mention the dozens of other companies that have started in the last few years. They're all going to be here. And now suddenly, what's going to happen is Guadalajara over time is going to become, now it's good enough for kind of these small companies in this lower market, but over time it's going to get closer and closer and closer
to the bigger market,
to being able to support the big companies. And that's disruption. Now let's talk about why San Francisco can't respond to that disruption, or the Silicon Valley can't respond to that disruption. In my mind, the main problem, and this is the case for a lot of companies as well, is they have an improper cost structure. They spend too much money to support too high end of a product.
Interesting.
Right? So just like this, San Francisco, you go to a house, $2 million to get a house. Now, if I made $100 million a year like Sundar Pichai made, like in 1 year he got like stock options. I don't know if he makes that every year, but he makes tens of millions of dollars a year. You got to have a mansion, you got to have the whole thing, right? So, there's these high-end amenities, and the market has moved to support them. But the thing is, only when you need to attract like these super successful people and keep them working at your company and pay them all this, then you need a playground for millionaires. And that's kind of what San Francisco's become.
Yeah.
But what happens is when you build a playground for millionaires like you do in Palo Alto or San Francisco, you're making a choice there, because you can't both support a kind of a semi-rural Palo Alto where everyone has these giant yards and it's super nice and there's no traffic and all your kids go to school with other executives' kids. You can't support that and then also support, hey, you can come in as just a hacker, move in, live here in a place for $200 a month and work on your dream until it becomes a reality.
Right.
No,
it's prohibitive.
If you move to exactly.
Yeah.
If you move to San Francisco right now, you got to pay $4,000 or $5,000 a month.
Interesting.
If you live by in a one-room apartment.
So if you move to service the higher end of the population and the market and the economy, which is with those big companies, you're losing on the opportunity to attract the smaller companies, the ones that actually created that environment, and that's why it's allowing other ecosystems like the one here in Guadalajara to actually thrive and potentially dethrone the Silicon Valley. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's the interesting question. Okay. Because you look at the top 5 internet companies: Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google.
Yeah.
What is Facebook number 5? They're collectively worth like trillions of dollars, right? If the market goes up 5% one day, it's $150 billion of increase in valuation. Now, once Uber IPOs, every unicorn in existence, every company worth $1 billion in existence will be less than like a small fluctuation in the price of these big guys, right? And so you look at the political response and you look at the economic response to that in Seattle, in San Francisco, in LA, in New York. The prices are going up so much because if I'm a politician and I'm in LA or I'm in San Francisco, do I want to potentially upset all these companies and upset all these wealthy people who've moved and are movers and shakers in these industries so that I can maybe have a $5 million startup?
Yeah.
No. They don't care if there's like a dozen $5 million startups, but what did Google start as? Remember, they offered to sell Google to Yahoo in 1997 for $1 million.
Yeah.
It's worth $800 billion now, right? And so what's happening is the United States is pricing out systematically, and there are still small startups, primarily in my experience led by people with a lot of wealth to fall back on. But there's millions and millions of people around the world who could be using new technologies like cloud and using all the new mobile platforms. And you just don't see a huge flowering of dozens or hundreds of startups a year that are coming up with these crazy small little ideas. It's either super well-funded startups funded by heavy-duty VCs who back well-credentialed, well-pedigreed people. Or it's giant megacorps, and when you can pay so much to every engineer, there's just no engineers laying around in San Francisco who are starting startups anymore, and everybody's kind of happy about it. The engineers make a lot of money, the people who own the houses make a lot of money, the companies make a lot of money, there's no competition from tiny startups that can put you out of business. So everybody's kind of agreed that super expensive cost of living is fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't like it, but they're not in control of California or New York. But that leaves a huge opportunity.
Interesting.
And that opportunity is for a disruptive, potentially, and I say this with the most affection, everyone, a potentially worse city for tech. Like Guadalajara. I mean, it's pretty clear along a lot of metrics that this is not as good a place to run a giant company. But if you wanted to start a tiny little company that didn't want to have to raise a lot of money, that wanted to try out some weird idea and see if it worked, that's simply not a place you want to go. You don't want to go to San Francisco anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
And so the question is, can we get a critical mass of these companies so that as the ecosystem improves, as the technology, that you're allowed to use in Guadalajara becomes better and better. I mean, I could just go on AWS console right now and start any kind of the same kind of thing that you could start in the Silicon Valley. I don't need a data center.
But on that premise, which is kind of interesting, if you were to do it in a I guess crappier city, it also allows to run far more companies that probably wouldn't get funded in a pricier city like San Francisco. To run your idea that doesn't, I mean, it does sound interesting, but man, like unless you have big ambitions and you can build something quite radical, like I'm not gonna fund you. Whereas like some ideas might fly down here because I mean I can give you $50K, go to town, come back if you have anything interesting. Right?
Yeah, and $50K will last you a few years.
Yeah.
No, and when Paul Graham says stuff like, hey, I would fund anybody who wants to go against Google. Now, that makes sense for Paul Graham, because Paul Graham can fund 1,000 companies at this point. I don't know, that many, a lot. But if you're a founder, do you want to take a 1 in 1,000 chance to win?
In a million, I guess. I don't know. It's too much.
Like a 1 in 1,000 chance is not that enticing. And it's because you need to find a solution by the time you run out of money. And if you're going to run out of money in a year and then you have to go raise your Series A or you run out of cash because all your engineers are super expensive, your cost of living is super high, you have less, you're trying to win the lottery and you get to buy fewer tickets.
Yeah.
And it's like if you can go to a lower cost location, there's ideas that will survive with a lower cost basis for longer until maybe they do figure out a way to Google, or you can take more chances by funding more companies to address the same market if you're a VC. And there's a lot of advantages of low price. And if you told, and here's what's shocking to me, is that I think like maybe I'm brainwashed. I brainwashed myself into believing this, that like a city like Guadalajara could actually produce these kind of industry competitive at the Google level companies in certainly in my working life, in the next 10 to 15 years. I'm going to retire when I'm 50. But before the next 10 years out, have some like radically different companies. And sometimes I feel like, we certainly agree on these things, and there's a lot of people we talk to, but the fact that the industry as a whole thinks that it can have a cost basis for cost of living and for infrastructure and things like that, that's 5 or 10 times higher than other cities, and that those of agglomeration effects of everybody, like you have to be in the Silicon Valley or you can't start a company, are going to last forever. I think that's crazy. Like if you told like, hey, we have a product that's 10 times as much. I went and bought some new sunglasses on Amazon, and I went because I got LASIK, right? And so you get light sensitive after the LASIK operation, and so I wanted to go buy some sunglasses so I wouldn't, have like bright eye problems. And so I went into the optometrist's office and I said, how much is sunglasses? And they showed me. And all the sunglasses, like the Oakleys and the Ray-Bans and everything, like $200.
They're super expensive.
Super expensive. I was like, oh man, it's going to be expensive. But I need sunglasses and I need good ones. Yeah. And so I needed UV protection and polarization, all that stuff. And so then I went on Amazon and I looked it up, $10. I'm like, well, these might not be very good sunglasses for $10. Well, but I'll try them out. I got 2, just in case the first one sucked. I could maybe have 2 chances, right? And it turns out the cheap sunglasses for $10 were every bit as good as what I tried on at the store, so as far as I could tell.
It's actually what Jamie Foxx did. I mean, talking about that crappier product, but then could be the disrupting market. I mean, there's talk out there about how sunglasses and prescription glasses are just off the roof in prices, and he built a brand called Privé Rebow. I mean, I don't know how to even pronounce that name, but he said like one time I was just losing sunglasses left and right. Jamie Foxx. Yeah. And he went into a gas station and bought gas station sunglasses, and he said like, those are $7. These are actually very good, right? And he decided to create a brand where no sunglasses is expensive, more expensive than $30. And he built the brand around it and actually bought a pair of those, and my wife loves them. Really? Right? Yeah. And everybody's like, oh, those are nice looking sunglasses. I'm like, yeah, $30. They're super amazing. So that's interesting because it applies to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the company that owns all of these brands, there's actually one company that owns almost all luxury sunglasses, which is Luxottica, which is based in, I think, Switzerland. And I was looking at their stock price, and I was just like, man, these sunglasses are nice.
Yeah.
These Amazon sunglasses I got, and they were delivered to my house like 2 days later. I didn't have to leave the house, and I was like, I should short Luxottica. But
Why
then
not?
the market can stay, wrong longer than you can stay solvent. So I don't go and run those option plays. But like, eventually, I think Luxottica is at severe risk. But if you're making $200 per sunglass and the other place is making 50 cents profit, and you're making $195 of profit, I mean,
you gotta
just
wonder.
run that as long as it'll go. And that's the thing. Is like when Luxottica eventually collapses, because nobody cares that much about it saying Ray-Ban. I don't care. I'm not gonna pay 20 times to say Ray-Ban instead of the sunglasses I got called Mary's, which is like, can you pick a less tough guy?
Yeah.
I want to put on my sunglasses and look hard, and it says Mary's on the side. So maybe that's a bad, like MERR, like Merry Christmas.
Oh.
But not like Mary, like a woman. I mean, I'm not like, I'm just saying it's a weird thing. Like, cheery sunglasses when it's like Ray-Ban or like more kind of like intense. But my point is, it's 20x. I'm not going to pay just to say Ray-Ban on the side of my head. That's crazy.
That's interesting.
But still, Luxottica is worth almost as much as it's ever been. And I'm like, oh man, it's probably going to go out. And when it goes out of business, what were they supposed to do? Because if Luxottica says, oh man, there's all these cheap sunglasses coming in the market, we should immediately drop our prices to $10. That's not that's stupid. You're going to throw away probably years more of making a huge amount of money, but at the same time, it's pretty easy to predict at this point that like nobody cares that much about what it says on your sunglasses, even if it does say Mary for the Marys for the for the cheap ones, to pay 20x.
Yeah, I agree.
And so those are those kind of funny situations. And you can say like, well, of course Silicon Valley is more expensive. The best companies are started there. But it's like, but at 5 to 10 times the cost to finance startups, like maybe it's the tech capital, but I don't know if it can survive as the startup capital. And you look at there's a recent IPO that's going to happen this year. The company just filed its S1, which is the form you file before you become an IPO, for Zoom. And you as the CTO, I think you selected Zoom as our teleconferencing software.
Yeah.
And there's two other competing ones that Zoom has that beat out at least at Wiseline.
Yeah.
Which was
Hangouts,
and then the Microsoft one, which is Skype,
or GoToMeeting, which used to be the de facto.
Well, and actually, I learned that the guy who started Zoom was actually a VP who started GoToMeeting.
Yeah, I bet.
And they wouldn't listen to him. He probably wanted to go to web, and they wanted to have all these, and Zoom has come and disrupted in some ways because it was very simple, web-based, no frills. And it just worked, and you bought it. But my point there is, there are a lot of big companies who've offered kind of a crappy solution across all of their different product lines. And so you go buy Microsoft Office, and while you're talking to the Microsoft rep, you decide, well, I'll get Skype too for video conferencing, and so on and so on. And Google similarly wants to create this suite of Google products with Gmail and all these other things, including Google Hangouts and so on. And what's happening is they're being picked apart by very focused, simple products like Slack and Zoom. And even though they're enormous, like they just can't focus enough to provide a good product. And I think you can maybe think of that as an analogy. It's like, the Silicon Valley is like impenetrable, but they're not the best at these tiny things.
Yeah.
And they'll just get picked apart one at a time until one of those little tiny things suddenly becomes worth $200 billion.
Yeah.
And I think that's the pathway. Is like Zoom might become the enterprise software company because once they IPO, they use that IPO money to buy a document solution, and they pick up another couple companies and they develop a couple products in-house, and suddenly they have something that rivals Microsoft.
Of course.
So I think that's how it goes down. But
that's a great concept.
Don't sleep on the cheap option, especially the cheap option that is currently worse. But people are starting to use it, and you're starting to see adoption. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here in Mexico. And it's probably the same thing in Colombia. It's probably same thing outside of the core centers in the United States. And maybe it's not Guadalajara, maybe it's not Medellin, maybe it's not Austin that wins. but it's going to be something. One of those companies is going to eventually just, because people are like, they said 38% of software engineers in San Francisco wanted to leave. Software engineers. 38% were thinking about leaving.
Wow.
And that's up from like 15% last year.
That's crazy.
So something's going to happen. And everyone thinks they're real smart and like, oh, it's stupid. Don't talk about Mexico. That's crazy. Who would move to Mexico? All their ideas in their head. But we're running successful businesses down here.
Yeah.
At a fraction of the cost, and so that's eventually we're gonna find some really, really big winners, and maybe it's already some of the companies are over here. And once it happens, everybody, well, of course of course a low cost is going to win.
Yeah.
But that's the key to this book, Innovator's Dilemma. That's what happens with disruption. It always looks terrible until just before it's like, oh, this is going to work.
Interesting.
And then the old company goes away.
Man, that was an interesting discussion, and I learned something pretty valuable today. So hopefully our listeners thought the same thing.
Let's put that quote right at the beginning. Interesting discussion. Learn something about. We're going to put this on YouTube.
Yeah.
We're going to have a video of us. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or something like that, and you say, man,
yeah,
I love this podcast, but if only I could see Matt and Vidal.
Those two folks.
Yeah.
Speaking.
Well, guess what? You can go to our YouTube page. I think it'll be something with the word Tectulia in it on YouTube. Just search for it. We haven't got the page yet. I mean, we always do this stuff after. But we encourage you. And the other thing we like about YouTube is comments.
Yeah. Leave us comments, because like in podcasting, I don't know if you can do that. I don't think you can do that.
Spotify doesn't have comments. I don't know how to get the comments from it. I mean, maybe people are leaving us like impassioned, like you guys are horrible. Also, we would like if you vehemently disagree with us,
please say so.
Yeah, please comment, because that's what drives the traffic is beef. Is if you really want your podcast to explode, you got to have a controversy. Yeah. Like Elon Musk has got to come on and smoke weed, or
we'll get there.
You got to invite on like a low-key neo-Nazi or something like that. That's very popular on the Joe Rogan.
Is it?
Yeah. Joe Rogan. I said it. You invite on low-key neo-Nazis. What are you going to do about that?
A beef with Joe Rogan right now.
Does he eat beef?
I think he does.
Is he not a vegan or anything?
I don't think so.
He's using like those. What did you say? What's this new folic acid thing?
So I've been a very anxious person all my life, and I discovered that apparently folic acid helps you tone it down.
Yeah.
I'm a very bad case of road rage. For the last 2 weeks, I haven't been yelling at people on the road because I've been taking folic acid. I'm like, oh my god!
Don't let Claire hear that. I'm gonna get dosed with folic acid every morning in the coffee. Yeah. So Tectulia supplements is our new product line.
No.
They are full of, what was the other thing you're saying is good? Pork fat. Pork fat helps your brain.
Pork fat helps you be smarter. Like it has the type of fat. I should research the scientific name of the fat molecule that makes you smarter. But
I believe this. This one,
carnitas.
Carnitas. I was here. I don't know. I don't have a scientific explanation for this. I'm not saying it's like some spiritual thing. I just don't have the scientific explanation. But sometimes I'm down here. I get in a little bad mood.
Yeah.
And so it was like Sunday afternoon, and both Claire and I are just kind of in like not a great mood.
Yeah.
Just like, man. Sometimes she was saying like, I wish I could go to my grandma's house and get like some home cooking or something like that. And we're just both feeling in a bad mood. And I was like, I had this happen to me, Claire. And I got in a bad mood. And what I did, I took a special supplement called tacos.
And that's what my wife says.
I felt great. And so we joke about this. It's when you're feeling bad, come pan, but come tacos, right? And so we go down to the Los Salteños over a few blocks away, and we get tacos, and felt fantastic afterwards. We were both in the very best mood. And so there might be, so I got chorizo al pastor.
Nice.
I didn't get anything crazy. They don't have carnitas tacos. I think I got it like
buche. That's carnitas.
Is that what you can get?
I don't know if you can.
I remember you used to show me all of the taco fixings, but I don't know what it is. But tacos make me feel very good after I eat them.
100% of Mexicans would agree with you.
Because I could go get a burger, I could go get pasta. Does not have the same effect. Like
Tacos do.
Tacos have a very specific effect. So Sam Harris, pin you down. You can investigate the different medicinal properties of tacos.
Yeah.
Whether you could get like, cabeza cures a cold or something. What are we at? We got probably over our goal for time, but we really appreciate you if you've made it this far in the podcast.
Yeah.
Support our sponsors, Tacos One, and who's not actually yet brought in the
but Tacos One, if you're listening, we're hungry.
We should probably do an episode in Spanish.
And then I tell my wife that, so she says, like, I feel like barbacoa tacos tonight. And I told her. She's like, barbacoa tacos only for breakfast.
You said this. She's very persistent that it's only a breakfast taco.
Says who? They're delicious all day.
So here's my thinking. Is that the best tacos are the ones that are the most fresh. So you only want to go to a tacos place that's full.
Yeah.
Right? The more crowded the tacos place, that's where you want to go, because the tortillas are going to be fresh, the meat's going to be just barely made.
Yeah.
All the sauces aren't going to have been sitting out there for 12 hours. They're constantly refilling them, everything. And I think that's why you want to get barbacoa tacos for breakfast.
I agree.
Because that's when everybody else eats them.
Probably.
And even if you are one of these crazy people, you're like you're Steve Jobs
breakfast for dinner.
You're going to think different. And you go to that one weird barbacoa stand that stays open all night.
Get sick.
You're going to be like, there's going to be one person out there. It's going to be weird. The tacos are going to be kind of like, you ever got barbacoa tacos that have been on the grill too long?
Yeah.
They're too stiff. They're kind of like, they're like tough. And so, yeah, it's a collective action problem.
Agreed.
We could talk about game theory here. It's like kind of a shelling point, but you only eat barbacoa tacos because everybody else eats barbacoa tacos for breakfast.
I'll rest my case then.
That's a whole episode. I'm gonna go write a theory paper on this and submit it to.
Do it.
Yeah,
do it.
Well, that wraps up our. What are we on? 8, 9?
This would be the 9th episode. Yeah,
9th episode of Techtulia. Thank you to those of you who have been tuning in. 63%. Mexico, not 63% of Mexico, which would be a great.
We wish
that would be great. But of our listeners, 63% are from Mexico. I think 25% are from the United States, and then there's people from Vietnam and Australia. At least according to maybe people are VPNing to hide where they're coming from. But thank you for listening.
Thank you.